This evening, we're going to begin at Daniel chapter 11, verse 10. Now, just to recap where we are briefly, last week we saw that there had been 3 wars between the king of the north and the king of the south, which the south had won easily. The third war being the crushing defeat for the king of the north. The first was a minor skirmish between Antiochus Soter and Ptolemy Philadelphus, which the south won easily, and of which the scriptures do not discuss. The second war was the war between Antiochus Theos and Ptolemy Philadelphus, which again the king of the south won, and which resulted in the marriage or peace agreement of Daniel 11, verse 6, which we discussed last week. And the third war was between Seleucus Callinicus and Ptolemy Euergetes, when the south brutally conquered the north in revenge for the death of his sister, that's Euergetes' sister, after the peace agreement had been violated by the north. So Seleucus Callinicus then goes on to be captured by the Parthians after Euergetes had pretty much destroyed his troops. And he was captured in eastern Mesopotamia. So he made his son Seleucus Keranos king. But Seleucus Keranos is assassinated by his own army in 223 BC. And he leaves the throne to his younger brother, Antiochus III, who eventually becomes known in history as Antiochus the Great. And this is the start of Daniel 11, verse 10. It says, "But his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his forces." So his sons, that is, Seleucus Callinicus' sons, who are Keranos and Antiochus, they are stirred up to secure the Seleucid kingdom. Keranos, as we said, is killed, and Antiochus, who is far and away the better general, settles his empire and begins to look back towards the contested area between himself and Egypt, which is, of course, Lebanon and Palestine. Meanwhile, Ptolemy III, that's Ptolemy Euergetes, in the south, he dies the same year as Antiochus comes to power in the north. And his son, Ptolemy Philopator, he would be Ptolemy IV, comes to power. As verse 10 says, he passes through. That is, he passes through northern Palestine. This is Antiochus. He passes through northern Palestine, conquering Galilee and all the regions east of the Jordan. Winter sets in at this point, and he retreats back to the fortress at Ptolemais, just south of Tyre. And this brings us to verse 11. "And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand." In 217 BC, Ptolemy Philopator assembles an army and marches to meet Antiochus. They fight a major battle at Raphia in the southern city of Gaza, and the king of the south is again wonderfully victorious. As verse 12 says, "And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it." Philopator killed 10,000 of Antiochus' troops. He dealt Antiochus a terrible blow. But when he did so, as the text said, his heart was lifted up. What happened was Philopator went to Jerusalem, and he tried to enter the temple against the insistence of the Jewish priesthood. And when he tried to do this, he fell ill in the temple and was carried out as dead, though he eventually recovered. The third book of the Maccabees records it this way. "And at that time God, who seeth all things, who is beyond all holy among the holy, heard the prayer," and this would have been the prayer of Simon the priest. And the prayer, he says, was so suitable, "and scourged the man," Ptolemy Philopator, greatly uplifted with scorn and insolence, shaking him to and fro as a reed is shaken with the wind. He cast him upon the pavement, powerless, with his limbs paralyzed, and by a righteous judgment, deprived of the faculty of speech, his friends and bodyguards, beholding the swift recompense which had suddenly overtaken him, struck with exceeding terror and fearing that he would die, speedily removed him. Philopator, after this terrifying event, eventually recovered, but he didn't gain anything from his great victory over Antiochus. He allowed Antiochus to retreat, and he himself went back to Egypt. So unlike his father Euergetes in that third war, he didn't try to carry the battle into the Seleucid Empire, and therefore he was not strengthened by his great victory at Raphia. In fact, Philopator, when he returned to Egypt, lost all interest in governing. He ceased to work and to strengthen his empire, and involved himself only in pleasures and immoralities. 13 years later, in 204 BC, Ptolemy Philopator dies mysteriously and leaves his infant son as king under the guidance of two corrupt men who begin to run and ruin the southern kingdom. Now, as we look at this prophetically, what can it mean? Well, each time in history that Jerusalem is destroyed, we see that it was on the third advance. She was conquered but survived the first two times, but then she is demolished on the third advance. If we consider Babylon and its destruction of Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar came down in 604 BC and took the city but left Jehoiakim as king. Jehoiakim rebelled, and so Nebuchadnezzar came back a second time in 597 BC and carried off Jehoiakim, placing Zedekiah on the throne. Then Zedekiah rebelled, and Nebuchadnezzar returned the third time and totally destroyed the city, burning the temple and carrying away the population. Similarly, in the Roman destruction, the Jews rebelled, and the Roman counselor Gaius came to put down the rebellion. He failed and called for support from Rome to deal with the insurrection. The Emperor Nero sent Vespasian, who was then making his second advance, nearly conquered all of Israel. But as he approached Jerusalem, Nero died. Vespasian then returned to Rome to contest for who would be the next Caesar. And finally, Titus came and put the city under the siege, finally destroyed it, its walls, and the rebuilt temple. And that was on the third advance. So what we have seen in this 11th chapter of Daniel is that Seleucus Callinicus took Jerusalem in the Third Greek War, but he was unable to hold it. Antiochus the Great took Jerusalem in the Fourth Greek War, but also he was unable to hold it. And that is where we are in this chapter. Jerusalem had survived two advances by the northern king, protected both times by the king of the south. But now things are happening in the south, which is changing everything. The corruptions and immoralities of Ptolemy Philopator, the fourth king of the south, has left an even more corrupt people in charge of the southern empire. Perhaps even more important is the hostility that grew between Israel and the southern king due to the failure of the Jews to accommodate the southern king in his effort to enter the temple. This is where the true hostility between Israel and the king of the south starts to develop. So as we move on to the 13th verse, we see that in the next 5 verses, all are prophetic of the king of the north's victory over Palestine, where he defeats Egypt's army that is defending Israel. In Daniel 11, starting at verse 13, we read, "For the king of the north," that is Antiochus the Great, he's still in charge because Philopator didn't pursue his advantages against him. "The king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army, and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the infant king of the south, Ptolemy Epiphanes. Also, the robbers of the people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fail. So the king of the north shall come and shall cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south, that would be Egyptian general Scopas, shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he shall come against him, Antiochus, but he that cometh against him, that is, when Antiochus the Great comes, he shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, that is Jerusalem, which by his hand shall be consumed. Here we have the end of the king of the south. It's the end of his ability to resist the northern hosts. The turning back of Gog, mentioned in Ezekiel 38, is now over. The push from the king of the south in Daniel 11 towards the end of the chapter is over. The northern hosts are now victorious over the king of the south and over Jerusalem. Antiochus defeats the Egyptian general Scopas in Palestine, and Scopas surrenders at Sidon in Lebanon. Antiochus's victories over the Egyptian general is a type of God's great victory over the ships of Tarshish, her young lions, along with Sheba and Dedan and Jerusalem, who complain, "Art thou come to take a spoil?" They are not saying, "Are you going in there to take a spoil?" No, Scopas was in Lebanon and in Palestine, just as Tarshish will be in the land of Israel when the northern king comes down to be victorious. Art thou come to take a spoil? We read of this in Ezekiel 38. And thou, Gog, shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates, to take a spoil and to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods, that dwell in the midst of the land. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee, Art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to take a great spoil? And Antiochus's victory is detailed in the account of the concluding verses of Daniel 11. In Daniel 11, starting at verse 40, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and chief of the children of Ammon. Now, as we can clearly see, these verses prophesy of the king of the north's great victory over the king of the south. Now, the question I've always had was, what is it that causes the king of the south to fail? I asked this question in regards to the promises made to Abraham, which are very clear. In Genesis 12, 1 through 3, we read, Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house into the land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation. And I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Now there has never been a nation which has blessed Israel the way the United States has blessed Israel. Now let's examine this question thoroughly. Perhaps the most symbolic act occurred when President Harry Truman recognized the new state of Israel 11 minutes after David Ben-Gurion declared Israel's independence. This gave Israel immediate international legitimacy. It encouraged other nations to recognize Israel, and it strengthened Israel diplomatically during their war of independence. President Truman later wrote that he believed that the recognition of Israel was one of the most important decisions he made in the presidency. Now, beginning especially at the Six-Day War in 1967, the United States gradually became Israel's principal military supporter. This has included the most advanced fighter aircraft, the world's most sophisticated missile defense systems, and billions of dollars in security assistance. Today, Israel possesses one of the most advanced militaries in the world, aided substantially by decades of American cooperation. Also, to facilitate aid if Israel needs it, the United States stores its own weapons in warehouses in Israel. Now also, many historians regard what was called Operation Nickelgrass as the most important American action in the blessing of Israel. During the Yom Kippur War of 1973, Israel suffered severe early losses against Egypt and Syria. This was the scariest war for Israel. Following a surprise attack, and for 2 full days, the Egyptian and Syrian armies advanced against Israeli positions. Golda Meir, who was prime minister at the time, had President Nixon awakened at 3 o'clock in the morning to get the airlift of supplies started to reinforce Israel, which Nixon did. He had his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, take Golda Meir's order, and when Kissinger presented it to President Nixon the following morning, Nixon ordered him to double it. But then Britain and France refused to allow American planes to land to be refueled as they were trying to deliver the supplies to Israel. Americans had to dangerously refuel their planes in midair over the Mediterranean in order to airlift supplies to Israel. After Israel gained the ascendancy in the war, Mrs. Meir addressed the Israeli Knesset this way. She records this in her diary. I wanted also to make public our gratitude to the President and the people of America, and equally clear our rage at those governments, notably the French and British, that had chosen to impose an embargo on the shipment of arms to us when we were fighting for our very lives. Now, following this war, Prime Minister Meir flew to London to address the Socialist Convention. The convention was attended by the British Labour Party, which had failed to support Israel during the war, embargoing arms, as she said, and even refusing to allow the American planes destined for Israel to land to refuel. This also is taken from her autobiography, and is part of Mrs. Meir's speech in Britain. I just wanted to understand, in the light of this, what socialism is really about today. Here you are, all of you. Not 1 inch of your territory was put at our disposal for refueling the planes that saved us from destruction. Now suppose Richard Nixon had said, I am sorry, but we have nowhere to refuel in Europe. We just can't do anything for you after all. What would all of you have done then? You know us, who we are. We are old comrades, long-standing friends. What did you think? On what grounds did you make your decision not to let those planes refuel? Believe me, I'm the last person to belittle the fact that we are only one tiny Jewish state, and there are over 20 Arab states with vast territories, endless oil, and billions of dollars. But what I want to know from you today is whether these things are decisive factors in socialist thinking too. She goes on, when I got through, the chairman asked if anybody wanted to speak, but nobody did. Then someone behind me, I didn't want to turn my head to look at him because I didn't want to embarrass him, said very clearly, of course they can't talk. Their throats are choked with oil. Later, when Iraq became a threat to Israel under Saddam Hussein, giving $20,000 to the families of suicide bombers, the U.S. engaged in 2 wars, which ended the Iraq threat to Israel. Now, as Brother Thomas points out in Elpis Israel, he says, as I have said elsewhere, the lion power will not interest itself in behalf of the subject of God's kingdom from pure generosity, piety towards God, or love of Israel, but upon the principle which actuates all the governments of the world, upon those namely of the lust of dominion, self-preservation, and self-aggrandizement. With this in mind, in the 12-day war of 2024, for the first time since 1917, Britain has shown an interest in protecting Israel. The Houthis in Yemen had attempted to shut down British shipping through the Suez Canal via the Red Sea, and it has brought British warplanes from Cyprus into the battle against the Iranian-backed Houthis. Britain also participated in Israel's defense during the massive Iranian missile attack. But the real story was the official response from Israel's defense forces as regards the attack. That read, "The combined effort, which is believed to have included fighter jets and defensive systems deployed by Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt, came under the umbrella of the U.S. Central Command, whose mandate it is to coordinate military operations and activities between its allies in the Middle East. CENTCOM also aims to bolster regional security and support U.S. interests, including pushing back against Iranian aggression." That response went on. Last night, a defensive coalition of Israel and its international partners successfully thwarted a large-scale attack from Iran. IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said during a briefing on Sunday, "The threat from Iran was met with the aerial operation, technological, and intelligence superiority of a united defensive coalition of international allies led by the United States, together with Great Britain, France, and other partners." In scriptural speak, the U.S. umbrella and the forces led by the United States, described in the Jewish Defense Report, is what Isaiah called shadowing with wings over Israel. Isaiah 18, 1 through 2 says, "Ho, land of widely o'ershadowing wings, extending from beyond the two rivers of Cush, which sendeth by sea whirling things, even upon vessels of fleetness, on the surface of water. Go swiftly, ye fleet messengers, to a nation carried away and oppressed, to a people terrible from this and onward, a nation prostrate and trodden down, whose lands the rivers have spoiled." And that is Brother Thomas's translation of Isaiah 18, 1 through 2. Now, the whirling things on vessels of fleetness is a very apt description of the planes and missiles launched by the U.S. Navy in defense of Israel. But the U.S. has not just defended Israel militarily. They have also defended Israel diplomatically. For decades, the United States has frequently used its veto power in the United Nations Security Council to block resolutions viewed as unfairly singling out Israel. This diplomatic protection has often prevented sanctions or other measures that could have isolated Israel internationally. Since 1972, the U.S. has blocked 51 United Nations condemnation of Israel, and these are only the official condemnations. There were many others advanced that the United States forced to be withdrawn before they became official. They have only failed to block one. In the closing days of President Obama, the U.S. abstained from a condemnation of Israel's action in Judea and Samaria, and we will discuss that at a later date. Now, continuing on with the blessings of the United States over Israel, President Trump in 2017 recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and relocated the United States Embassy there. Supporters viewed this as acknowledging the practical reality that Israel's government sits in Jerusalem. 2 years later, the United States became the first major country to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Israel has considered the area strategically vital since capturing it in the 1967 war. And the Trump administration helped broker the Abraham Accords, leading to the normalization of relations between Israel and several Arab states, which includes the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco. These agreements represented one of the most significant shifts in Middle Eastern diplomacy in decades. The United States assisted Israel in the destruction of Hamas. And of course, the current ongoing war with Iran and trying to force a peace agreement between Lebanon and Israel are simply a continuing of the U.S. trying to bless Israel since 1948. Now, 2/3 of all the missiles and drones aimed at Israel from Iran were knocked down by American forces. And as we saw in our consideration of the Third Greek War and in today's consideration of the Fourth Greek War, that blessing will continue. So given all this, I come back to my question. Why will the U.S. be cursed and defeated when the northern king descends into Israel, as the testimony so clearly indicates? It will be because eventually the United States will betray Israel. We saw in the Fourth Greek War that the southern king, Ptolemy Philopator, after securing his victory at Raphia, disrespected the temple and later fell into great corruption and immorality. From this, we can understand at the time of the end, after successfully defending Jerusalem twice from northern invaders, she will betray her calling and turn on Israel. We see this in the condemnation of Tyre, the capital city of Tarshish, and a type of the king of the south at the time of the end. In Ezekiel 26:2 we read, "Son of man, because that Tyrus had said against Jerusalem, Aha, she is broken, that was to the gates of the people. She is turned unto me, I shall be replenished. Now she is laid waste. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Tyrus, and will cause many nations to come up against thee, as the sea causes his waves to come up." And again in Amos, we see the same thing. Amos 1:9, "And the Lord said, For 3 transgressions of Tyrus, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they delivered up the whole captivity to Edom, and remembered not the brotherly covenant. But I will send a fire on the wall of Tyrus, which shall devour the palaces thereof." So now as we cast about to see the conditions of the nations today, can we not see the seeds of this taking place in the United States elections? Anyone who can't is simply not paying attention. Nearly half of the Democratic Party, the largest political party in the United States today, is openly anti-Semitic. This is remarkable. We had a Democratic candidate in the last primary, a congressional primary, here in Texas, who openly advocated putting Zionists in concentration camps. And while she lost, she got an astounding 33% of the Democratic vote. And there is even a small, at this point very small, but who knows what lies in store, portion of the Republican Party which is, if not anti-Semitic, at least opposed to foreign wars, including, and maybe it would be fair to say especially, a war in support of Israel. It is clear that Israel can see this trend as well, and has begun insisting that Israel herself should provide for her own defense. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been very loud in insisting that Israel begin to cover all her own costs in defense. This is from a July 1st, 2026 article, just about a week ago. Netanyahu said Israel's economy is approaching $1 trillion and would be able to finance itself starting next year. In a previous interview with CBS 60 Minutes on May 11th, Netanyahu said Israel should reconsider its financial relationship with the United States. Absolutely, he said when asked that question. And I've said this to President Trump. I've said it to our own people, he said at that time. He added that the process should begin immediately and continue over the next decade. The U.S. is Israel's largest ally. In 2016, both sides signed a 10-year agreement covering 2019 through 2028, under which the U.S. aid to Israel totals $38 billion. Disagreements between Tel Aviv and Washington have recently increased over ongoing negotiations with Iran and a memorandum of understanding between the two sides. Israeli officials have said that the Trump administration sidelined Tel Aviv from talks with Washington and did not fully take Israel's interests into account. It was just this kind of thing, the deserting of its support of Israel, that caused Tyre to fall out with Jerusalem in the first place. Tyre's King Hiram had been a loyal friend and an ally of Israel's King David. So loyal that Hiram was chosen to provide material for the temple. The prophets reminisced about their relationship in Ezekiel 28. Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou sealest up the sum full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering. The sardius, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountains of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee. Of course, these stones mentioned are the stones of the high priest's breastplate, the symbolism being that Tyre had such a close relationship with Israel that they were covered under the blessings made to Abraham for his work in the temple. Tyre, in the days of Hiram and King David, walked among Israel, upon the mountains of Israel, among the stones of fire, which are those breastplate stones as they glistened. And from that position, Tyre became the cherub that covered Israel. They were anointed by God to do so. Is it not clear that that is what's happening right now between the United States and Israel? The nation of Israel rejoices over President Trump. They have named streets and buildings after him in Jerusalem. President Trump has even joked that when his presidency is over, he might run for Prime Minister of Israel. He claimed that he's so popular there, he would win easily. Now this verse in Ezekiel 28 shows us another characteristic of Tyre. It says, Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Note that now. God says, I have set thee so. God set Tyre in this position. And anyone familiar with the American history knows how many miracles it took for the United States to defeat the greatest world power of its day in Britain in 1781. It took 15 miracles between 1776 and 1781 for America to defeat Britain in the Revolutionary War. Each one of those 15 could have resulted in failure of the war had they not happened. The war, in fact, would have been over about as soon as it had begun, had it not been for two miracles which saved the American forces right away. The British were preparing for an attack on Boston, similar to their successful rout at Bunker Hill. The Americans were unprepared and unfortified against the British attack. But a brutal storm occurred, causing the British to delay the attack. By the time the storm cleared, the Americans had put fortifications in place, and the British, because of this, called off the attack and abandoned Boston. Then, shortly after, the Americans were defeated at Long Island in New York. The entire Revolutionary Army was pinned down by the British up against the Hudson River. George Washington ordered an evacuation over the river, but the winds on the river were against him. Suddenly, the winds changed directions, and the troops began to withdraw. But the whole army could not get over before the sun came up, when the British would have noticed. When the sun came up, the fog set in so thick that they said they could not see the end of their guns. The American army was able to evacuate its positions before the British knew that they were living, and then they lived to fight another day. These sorts of things continued to happen all through the war. And then at the end, when Washington had trapped the British General Cornwallis at Yorktown, a sudden storm stopped Cornwallis's attempted escape. Cornwallis attempted to ferry his able-bodied troops across the York River to Gloucester Point. His plan was to break through the Allied forces there and escape northward. He had already evacuated some of his troops when a sudden, intense storm arose again. The storm scattered his boats and made further crossings impossible. Cornwallis had to bring the troops who had crossed back to Yorktown. Shortly after, he was trapped by Washington and surrendered. Had the storm arisen somewhat earlier, Cornwallis might never have begun, and he never would have lost his boats, which he could have escaped with. Had it arisen later, most of his army might have escaped. It struck exactly when the British army was divided across the river, ruining its last realistic attempt at escape. The storm also delayed the British General Clinton by several days, causing him to arrive with 5,000 replacements too late to help General Cornwallis. He arrived on the day just after Cornwallis surrendered. One day earlier, and Yorktown may have ended quite differently. My point is that God set up the United States to play this important role at the time of the end. Her role has been in play for some time now. We read in Revelations 11, verse 3 through 5, "And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth, and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed." This is a prophecy of how true believers were protected from the God of the earth, or Catholicism, for 1,260 days or years. This was the protection that took place when the true servants of God were sealed or protected by a force that opposed the Catholic Church. The 2 witnesses are the earth witness and the woman witness. The earth witness was the political forces which were hostile to the Catholic Church and which made physical war against him, while the woman witness were the religious forces which were opposed to the Catholic Church, but who could not pick up arms to defend themselves. Because they could not pick up arms themselves, God provided them with a force that would protect them, and that force was the earth witness. These witnesses worked from the time of Constantine, from the time when Constantine legalized the church and gave it power in 312 AD, till the St. Bartholomew's Massacre in 1572, a period of 1,260 years. At that time, Catholicism got the upper hand and caused, through the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, the 2 witnesses to lie dead in the street for 3.5 days. These days, being religious days, they were lunar days of 30 days each, and for a total of 105 years. Then we see that they were to be reborn. In Revelations 11:11 we read, "And after 3 days and a half, the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon all them which saw them." 105 years later, in 1789, we saw 2 great revolutions. We saw the French Revolution, and we saw the ratification of the American Constitution, completing that revolution. And in fact, it was under the American Revolution that the truth, that is, the woman witnesses, as developed by Brother Thomas, came back to life. So the earth witness came back to life in 1789, allowing the woman witness to rise and protecting her from that point forward. So like Tyre, God brought America into being for a specific purpose. And over the last 250 years, she has come to fulfill her role as the great Tyre of the earth. Now, ancient Tyre, in that blessed position, became extremely wealthy. But Tyre believed that she did so through her own talents. We read in Ezekiel 27, "Now thou, son of man, take up a lamentation for Tyrus, and say unto Tyrus, O thou that art situate at the entry of the sea, which are a merchant of thy people for many isles, thus saith the Lord God, O Tyrus, thou hast said, I am perfect. or I am of perfect beauty. Thy borders are in the midst of the seas. Thy builders have perfected thy beauty. And again, in Ezekiel 28, we read, Son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus, Thus saith the Lord God, Because thy heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am a God. I sit in the seat of God in the midst of the seas. Yet thou art a man, and not God, though thou set thine heart as the heart of God. Behold, thou art wiser than Daniel. There is no secret that they can hide from thee. With thy wisdom and with thine understanding thou hast gotten thee riches, and hast gotten gold and silver into thy treasures. By thy great wisdom and by thy traffic hast thou increased thy riches, and thine heart is lifted up because of thy riches. This is the second part of what causes the downfall of Tyre. They came to a point where they failed to understand that their successes was a blessing from God for blessing Israel, and thought it was their own talents which had brought it to be. Can we not see the seeds of this in the recent statements from President Trump? This is from Yahoo News. President Donald Trump signaled a deepening rift with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by claiming there would be no Israel without him in a stinging rebuke at the G7 summit. Speaking alongside Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani at the summit of the world's biggest economies in Evian-les-Bains in France, Trump said, Without the United States, there would be no Israel. Without me, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what I did. Israel would have been blown up a long time ago had I not gotten involved, said Trump, although he denied frustration with Netanyahu, saying the two had a great relationship. But he criticized recent Israeli attacks in Lebanon and said too many civilians had been killed. This is the same kind of rift that eventually led to Tyre and Tarshish's downfall. America's success is God's success in providing America advantages due to their blessing of Israel. But when that stops, and the prophecy tells us it will stop, then America will come under the same curses as its type, Tyre and Tarshish, did. Now, as we mentioned before, the southern king, Ptolemy Philopator, corrupted his kingdom with immorality and died mysteriously, leaving it to his infant son and even more corrupt advisors. And this is what weakened the king of the south. Thus, it was not the king of the north who weakened the south, but God who orchestrated Egypt's fall. So likewise, it will not be the Gogian host who weakened the latter-day Tarshish, but God. God will bring the east wind against the ships of Tarshish, breaking them in the midst of the sea. In Ezekiel 27 we read, The ships of Tarshish did sing of thee in thy market, and thou wast replenished and made very glorious in the midst of the sea. The rowers have brought thee into great waters. The east wind hath broken thee in the midst of the sea. Thy riches and thy fares, thy merchandise, thy mariners, thy pilots, thy caulkers, and the occupiers of thy merchandise, and all thy men of war that are in thee, and all that are in company which is in the midst of thee, shall fall into the midst of the sea in the day of thy ruin. Psalm 48:7 repeats that. Thou, that's God, breakest the ships of Tarshish with an east wind. With the Tarshish power weakened by God, Ezekiel 38 is allowed to occur. And the northern king is victorious in Lebanon and Palestine, just as Antiochus the Great was when he took Lebanon and Jerusalem, while Edom, Moab, and the children of Ammon escaped for a while, and he left off interest in Egypt. In his booklet, The Destiny of the British Empire, Brother Thomas speculated that the east wind would be hurricanes in the Mediterranean. I've listened to some others who have speculated that the east wind might be China. I noted in a previous talk that the first ship of Tarshish, the Minoans, were completely wiped out as a civilization by the biggest volcano known to man in the Mediterranean. This, I believe, is the type we should look at as the force that will destroy Tarshish. The judgments will be natural, directed from God, so that there can't be any confusion. Thank you.